Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the Blabosphere, listening live or on replay. This is Art Jones, your principal consultant at The Art of Standing Out, where we use design thinking, storytelling, and brand strategy to help you market better so you can sell more. And today, my co-host is Tracy Goodwin. And Tracy, tell the people of the Blabosphere who you are and what you do.
I am Tracy Goodwin, and I am delighted to be here with you today, Art Jones. I'm a voice expert, and I teach people how to sound more confident, how to step into their voice power so that they can make a much bigger impact speaking their truth, sharing their message. I just teach them how to do it beautifully.
I like all of those words, impact, authority, and doing it beautifully all at the same time. What more could you ask for? And today we're talking about sales. And, there's this great book that was written, I don't know how many years ago now, somewhere in the last 10 years by Daniel Pink. And the title is something like, "To Sell is Human," meaning that we all do it. I mean, there was a time where the census said that 2 out of 9 people were in sales, selling cars, selling refrigerators, selling insurance. With the pivot we've had in the marketplace, things have changed incredibly. And now we all are selling ideas, we're selling product, we're selling services, we're selling everything. I sell ideas to my dog when I want her to sit and stay and get down. So we all have to have an aptitude for knowing how to sell. And I think the exciting thing about today is that we're going to match this notion of stepping into your authority with using your voice, and then marrying that voice control with a compelling story. And I'm going to do a little science here, just a really quick read, and some science that sets the stage for the conversation. And I'll just read this if you bear with me. According to Uri Hansen from Princeton, a story is the only way to activate parts in the brain so that a listener turns the story into their own idea and experience. The next time you struggle with getting people on board with your projects and ideas, simply tell them a story where the outcome is that doing what you had in mind is the best thing to do. According to Princeton researcher Hansen, storytelling is the only way to plant ideas into other people's minds. That's because we're wired for story. We are wired for it. We've been telling stories to communicate, to govern societies long before we have the written word. And today, hopefully, we'll give you some insight on how to create a great story, but then how to deliver that story with authority and, as Tracy says, with some beauty in it, so you can accomplish more. Tracy, anything you want to say to build on that?
Ditto.
Yeah. Okay.
No, all of that is great. And of course, I love everything you say. We are so on the same page. And I just have to agree with all of that. Storytelling is so key because it's the story that we connect to, because the story and how we use our voice to tell it is what affects people on an emotional level. And that's how we make an impact. So, and that's sales. You're right. I mean, I definitely am going to have some stuff to say about sales and the voice. So agreed. And we had I had the pleasure of being on Blab with you yesterday, and we talked a little bit about this next quote that I want to share. And it says, "Knowledge is having the right answer. Intelligence is asking the right question." Because if you don't know what question you should be asking, if you don't know what story you should be telling, then you're just making noise. I don't care how good a storyteller you are, how credible you are with using your voice. If you don't know your audience, if you don't know the person standing in front of you and what their needs are, what their challenges are, and where the opportunities are in their world, or in that business, or in that audience of 1,000 people, then you're just making noise, because your message might be like a missile right over their head, because you're not speaking to them, you're speaking at them. And our mission today is to kind of set the stage to help you be more effective in building stories
and more effective in using your voice to communicate those stories. And another little bit of another study that I think builds on this. We talked about the science of why story matters. There's a study that talks about salespeople, and I like to quote this one because this is the gold standard in sales today. And it says that the study went to look at the types of salespeople that work in all lines of business selling things. There's the hard worker, somebody who always goes above and beyond the call of duty, that goes the extra mile. There's the challenger, always has a different view of the world, understands the customer's business. There's the relationship builder, builds strong customer advocates, generous in giving time to help others. The lone wolf follows their own instincts, self-assured. The problem solver reliably responds, ensures that all problems are being solved, detail-oriented. And what the survey says that was done, it suggests that, to everybody's surprise, the relationship builder is the one that succeeds less in sales situations. Because when you're trying to separate me from my money, putting your arm around me and taking me to lunch and playing golf with me might make me like you. But if you want me to write the check, I need to have confidence that you really are solving my problem. And that's why the challenger on the far end of that is somebody that enters the conversation and challenges your ideas and says, I know you've done the research, but have you thought about these things? And what I'm going to submit is that each of these modalities, let's call them, each of these types, the hard worker, the challenger, the relationship builder, the lone wolf, and the problem solver, we are all of these things at some point in time in interacting with a business or a person as we're collaborating with them to create solutions for them. And I am going to ask Tracy this question. Isn't it true that the hard worker, the challenger, the relationship builder, the lone wolf, and problem solver each speak with a different voice?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And
absolutely. And we even, I can even take that one step further. Within shades of that, we all have, I've got a voice that I use, and this is not a fake voice. These are shades of voices, the people I'm closest to and most comfortable with, the people that I'm in conversation, but I don't know as well. When I present with notes, when I present material I love, when I present material I don't, there are so many elements that are there and beyond anything we've even, I think people have really even imagined or explored. But yes, definitely.
And because we fall into these categories, I mean, ideally we all want to move toward the challenger because the challenger has the authority. The challenger's done the work to have the credibility and has done the voice work to speak with authority when they talk about the work they've done and why their idea might be something that person should consider. But the relationship builder should not be ignored, in spite of the fact that in today's world, if all you're doing is building relationships, you'll make money, but you can't go big with that strategy. And what we're really wanting to talk about is this idea that we have to know our ideal prospect. We have to know the businesses that we're talking to and where we are in that buyer's journey. And on that journey, what voice we should be speaking in and what message we should be conveying. And so how do we know where we are in the buyer's journey? Well, how do we know even who we're speaking to? You're at a networking event and somebody walks up and says, what do? You just tell them, and then you're selling them right there on the spot without saying, well, what do you do? Before I tell you what I do, let me tell you, I can tell you better if you tell me what business you're in. And then you can speak to the business you are, maybe even tell them a story about how you solve problems for people in that business that they're in. So it goes to this idea that the way we ask questions, the old Einstein that said, if you have a tough problem to solve and only 60 minutes to solve it, you spend 55 minutes thinking of the right question to ask, then it will only take you 5 minutes to answer that question. And there is something I learned early in my career, and it's the notion of open-ended questions and closed questions. A closed question is,
And I'll just give you some examples. The closed questions are simply things that you can answer yes or you can only answer yes or no to. It's not a conversation. Is the sky blue? Yes. Right? Is there anybody else I should talk to in this organization? No. So that doesn't get you anywhere. And when we are not mindful of what a closed-ended question is, and we haven't done the work to practice asking open-ended questions, we're not serving ourselves well, because if we don't ask the open-ended questions, how can we get them talking enough to help us understand who they are, to know, to use our empathy to understand them, and then insert our story into their narrative? So examples of open-ended questions where you have to editorialize, and I'll just give you a few. What would happen if, I wonder, what do you think about? In what way? Tell me about. What would you do? How can we? How did you? In what way? What do you suppose? All of those require the person you're asking those questions of to give you real long-winded answers. What do you suppose would happen if? Well, that's funny you should ask that question. This might happen, that might happen, and over here, this other thing might happen. Now you're getting the flesh on the bones. You have meat to deal with, and when you do tell your story, you know what story to tell because you've learned, you've discovered. So this notion of open-ended and closed-ended questions is really not what we want to blab about today, but it's to set the table for you to understand that when you simply say, you are the VP, is that right? And they say, yes, that's really not what you wanted to know. Tell me about your role and responsibility here at X company. Then they're going to tell you who they are and what they do and what their responsibilities are, which is what you want to know. Anything, Tracy, on that?
Yeah, well, I want to piggyback something on that. It's not directly related, but it kind of is directly related. And that is another element that I think that we really have to consider. And it's more of a communication concept, but it is absolutely linked to tonal quality and what we do with our voice. And that is in the knowing of our audience and whether we need to speak to them and communicate with them directly or indirectly. Are you a bottom liner, or do I flower with you? And I've noticed that with coaching, you know, you may have even asked me this question. I'm not sure if it's you or not, but someone recently asked me the question, do you coach your men differently than your women? Yeah. In relation to voice? I think that may have been you.
Yeah, I think we had that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, am I dealing with someone who needs me to bottom line with my more authoritative positioning in my vocal qualities and tone? Or am I dealing with someone who is going to fall apart at the mere vocal variety tool of volume?
Yeah.
We're gonna get a far greater result if we can get in tune with, okay, Art, he doesn't want me to go on and on and on. He wants me to bottom line it. That's what he needs. Or Art just doesn't like that bottom line stuff. He wants me to, reel it out, reel it in, really flat, turn it into a tapestry. I think that's valuable. I think that's very valuable in knowing our audience and what they're going to connect to on an emotional level, the way we communicate.
It's so true. And I think this goes back to kind of a core tenet of what I believe is that, when you're trying to sell to everyone, you can know no one. Mm-hmm. You can truly know no one. And when you begin with the idea that I can have 4 or 5 different types of people, different profiles that I sell to, that I want to do business with, because I know I can serve them and help them. I know how they're changed after they get my product, service, or solution. But I have to begin with one. And I begin with one, and I understand the profile. They're 35 to 45 years old. They make $100,000 a year. They're in this industry. They have these responsibilities, these challenges.
and these successes. And those challenges are where I insert my value to solve that challenge. And that's prospect number one. They're always men of 35 to 45. I know what industry they are. I know where they gather on and offline. I know all the things I need to know about them. And if I'm doing a really good job at this definition, that's the profile. Then there's the persona. They like sports. They like Game of Thrones, and they have a dog. Why? Because I like those things. And then I will be even more connected in a synergistic way with them. And with 7 billion people in the world, I don't need to sell to everybody. How many people do I need to sell to in a year to have a thriving business? If I have 500 net new customers a year, 150 net new customers in a year, that's a great business, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about this notion of trying to sell to everyone, when you walk up to someone and you can tell your story, they say, well, tell me about you, Art. And I tell them my origin story and who I serve. And they're not who I serve. Hearing the stories are repeatable, so they can go and carry that story with them. So when they're standing mowing the lawn and they see their neighbor, hey, Joe, and she walks over to the fence and say, Joe, how have you been? And Joe says, well, things at work are pretty crazy. We've got this big initiative where we have to solve this problem. And she says, it's funny, just the other day I was at a networking event and this guy told me this story about solving problems just like yours. At the networking event, it wasn't my ideal prospect, and I didn't try to sell her because I knew she wasn't my ideal prospect, but I told her my story, which she carried back to her yard doing yard work, so her neighbor repeated my story because stories are memorable. I could have given her my business card, and she could have handed it to that guy, and he would look at it and say, brand strategy, sales training. I've seen that movie before, but my story goes right to the heart of what problem he's trying to solve, as told by his neighbor, who I saw at a networking event.
Right.
So when you know your ideal prospect, and you know the stories that they want to hear, even when you're not talking to your ideal prospect, and you clearly know you're not, you tell the story of your founding of your business and the problems you solve, or the origin of your business, or the evolution, a story that they can carry away. So maybe even at that networking event across the room, have you gone off to another group and they are talking to somebody else that says, funny you should mention that, I'm struggling with this problem. And they then tell your story for you better than a business card. And that's where Tracy's expertise comes in, because when you're telling that story of your founding and why you founded this business and who you serve and the kind of problems you solve for them, that's when all the things that Tracy builds into that story make a huge difference, because stories are repeatable just inherently, but stories that touch you in the heart and the gut because you use the pacing and the tone help you sell the story to whomever is listening.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I believe if you can control and regulate your voice, you can control the room.
There you go. So having said all that, we've burned through about 20 minutes just kind of setting the table. And I'll just do this one last thing. And this is the 6 more benefits of telling story. Good storytelling beats good selling. We know that, right? Transforms belief and changes minds. You can call someone to action. You can lead them, right? Great leaders are great storytellers. Makes data and facts sing because they become interesting and they become relevant to that person because you're using the language of their voice, because you know them, you know what words to use, and there's power in words and how you use those words. It captures the attention of an audience or your customer. It infuses the information that you're sharing with a stickiness to improve the retention. And it motivates individuals or groups to take action. So why aren't we telling more stories? And, I've said a few times this morning that there's the origin story. There's the founding story, the evolution story, which are 3 stories central to every business. Then there's the customer story, and then there's the product story. Maybe we should pick one of those and talk about what's inherent in those stories.
It's like, here's a hat, pick a card out of the hat. Which one should we talk about? Because it really doesn't matter, because all 5 of those are impactful. And there's a zillion story types that every business should have. The founding story is your why I'm in this business, and who I'm in this business to serve. The origin story is what I know about me that enables me to found such a business, right? So the origin story precedes the founding of the business. What I've discovered about me that makes me ideally suited to found this business and bring you this value. The customer story is the story of the customer. And this is often the hardest one for people to get their head around, because it requires you to do the work to understand who you serve. When you know the narrative of the people in your audience that you serve, you know their narrative so well that it's like you could take a pen and a paper and write the story of their life, and they would read it and say, wow, that's the story of my life, because you know them that well. And it's not because you dreamt that up in your conference room all by yourself with your team. You've talked to them. You've talked to the customers you already have that are just like the other customers you already want to get, and said, I just want to validate that I know the kind of problems that you have, and to assure that we're solving those problems, that you don't have others that we might potentially solve. And what's going on in your life, where the successes are, where the challenges are, what your growth curve is like, and how we can help you get there. Those kinds of conversations help you validate that when you tell the stories of your customer, not to your customer, but to some stranger at a networking event. Well, it's funny you should ask that question about what I do. I serve this customer, and here's their story. They have this kind of business, they're this age, they make this kind of money, and these are the kind of struggles that they have. And that's the customer that I serve. And then the person will probably say, so that's interesting, that's who you serve. Well, tell me more about the product that you offer them. And then you tell the product story. The product that I offer is this and that, and it's for them because in their world they're struggling with this, and this product's inserted into their world, and this is how they're changed after they get my product, service, or solution. And so having those stories really gives you an opportunity to insert yourself into their narrative and touch them in a way that they retain the story and they can repeat the story. Or ask you, tell me more about the business that you're in. Tracy, what do you think?
I don't know. I love them all so much. My intuition said origin, but I think there's value in all of them. I think that one of the things that keeps resonating with me, and I'll throw this out there and then I'll let you decide which one, is that vulnerability piece. I just keep going back to vulnerability. And this is coming from my own perspective of all the stories that I never told until recently, but they are my most powerful tools. They appeared to me to be my greatest weaknesses, but yet they are the pieces that resonate with so many because they've experienced the same things. I always talked, well, I'm this, and I studied with this, and I've got, these are the results that I've got for you. But I've never talked about that time when. And then I mentioned it one time and the floodgates open. Oh my gosh, the same thing happened. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So what I thought was a great weakness ended up being my power tool.
And there was an event that I went to 7 years ago in New York, and the theme was the humanization of brands. And the humanization of brands are when brands they're vulnerable. They tell you the story of who they are and why they do what they do and who they do it for. And they show you the behind the curtain stuff, right? I mean, it's a great example of this is a commercial that's been around for about 5 years, and it's a big monolithic company, Fortune 100 company, General Electric, who makes jet engines, locomotives, and refrigerators. And when we think of GE, we think old, big, ginormous company. And Beth Comstock is a 50-something woman who's a chief marketing officer who breathed life into the way they tell their story and brought storytelling to General Electric. And one of the greatest commercials is where the camera follows the people that make the jet engines for these big, big jets. And somebody makes the blades and says, when I was a kid, I made model airplanes, and one day I wanted to be involved in the airplane business, and here I am living my dream. And there's a woman doing another part of the engine, and there's a guy with a big burly mustache, a handlebar mustache, doing a different part of the engine. There's 5 or 6 people that they show, all integral to building this ginormous engine that goes on this gigantic plane. And then the camera shows all of them lined up on the tarmac. And the plane's down at the end of the runway, the engine, and then it roars towards them and starts to get off the ground. The camera pans to the 6 people that are integral to making engine number 4. And they know it's their engine. And as the plane lifts off, they show the plane lifting off, and then they show the guy with the big handlebar mustache, the big 6'4", World Wrestling Federation looking guy, and does this. That's my baby. He doesn't say it, but you know that's what he's thinking.
Yeah.
And it's the humanization of the brand. It's a ginormous jet engine that costs a gazillion dollars, but real people made that plane fly.
Mm-hmm.
And we have stories like that about our businesses. We're real people, right? And when people hear the realness and the humanness in our story, they relate to that. I relate to jet engines now more because of that commercial. Mm-hmm. I relate to that big Fortune 100 company, and all the people in it are not just cogs in the wheel. They're human beings like my next door neighbor, like my colleague, like you and I. Mm-hmm. Each of us has the same opportunity to do that for our brand, to be more relatable, to be more engaging. And, when we talk about social media, what do we talk about? Engagement. And if you're not telling if you're not being vulnerable and telling the authenticity, telling the truth of who you are as a human that's found at that brand that offers these products and solutions, missing a huge opportunity. And that's why we're here today, to help people tell those stories.
Yeah, I love that. What a great story!
Isn't that great? Yeah. And there's another one that I can drop this one in the. If I can quickly find this, I don't know if I can. This is a 4-minute video, and it's Hugh Jackman from Wolverine to Les Miserables to Broadway. He's the quintessential modern Renaissance actor. And he is, said Hugh Jackman. I might not be able to find it. Mm. And the thing about showing this one, I think this is it. Yep, this is it. Here we go. I'm going to, oh, no, that's not it. Hold on. Oh, this is it. 2 minutes. So when I grab this, so what the story is, it initially, it reminds you of a Heineken commercial or the most interesting man in the world commercial. But what it represents is, I've got a dollar pen here. It has got a cute little thing that I can do swiping on my tablets. But Mont Blanc is a brand that's over 100 years old. Those pens with the little Meister struck on the end cost $150 or more, and they make watches. They make a lot of nice stuff. But as brands are like people, the brands are like people. They're like humans. Brands age, and when they age, they have a challenge. How do I reach a younger audience? I've aged with the people that loved me 25 years ago. How do I reach younger people today that don't know me? Well, this is a 2-minute video that tells how each of us has the same opportunity to, well, just here, watch this 2-minute deal.
The origin story. The evolution story.
Mhm.
It's pretty amazing.
That's great. I love that.
And it's fun, but it's you can see the origin where it began. You can see the evolution of how they changed throughout time.
Mhm.
And at the end, it's 007, it's
I love that.
Ernest Hemingway and Churchill, right? I mean, who why wouldn't I buy that pen? You know, then
Yeah.
then you discover it's a $150 pen and you say, but look at all that great story, that history. I want to be part of that. It's almost aspirational. And if we're not telling those kind of aspirational stories, and we have them. You know, it might not include 007, but when we think about it, and so here's kind of an exercise. And the exercise is you ask yourself, what's your company's history? And you get a pen and pad out and you just write down the history. It's like a blog post. It's your white paper on your history. And what are the values? What are the services you provide, and what kind of experience have you accumulated over time? That's your company story. That's kind of your founding story is built up in that. And then you think about what's your best success with a client and why. And that's kind of your story. That when the customer says, when your prospect says to you, well, that's interesting, can you tell me more about your business? Then you tell them about the success that a customer's had by using your product, service, or solution. But first you have to know it, and you have to write it down. And when you write it down, if you're a solopreneur, then you've written it down and you know it, you can remember it, and you can recite it. If you're a business with 5 employees, when you write it down, everybody can tell the same story and use it because it's powerful. And it's a way of building the culture that's around your brand. And it's not, so you're still a solopreneur, but you've got 5 channel partners or business partners. They know your origin story and your founding story and your customer success story. It goes to the culture that represents your brand, and they too can spread the word of the value in that brand. But having said all that, it's probably a good time to open the seat to somebody to come in that has an origin story, founding story, evolution story that they want to refine and find out how to use the power of their voice to be more compelling with it. The seat's open. Jump in. I'm going to get rid of that video for now. And don't be shy.
You know, I want to add something for possible consideration to all of this. Something that I actually love Elizabeth Gilbert because she talks about this. And just food for thought. I hear everything you're saying. I agree with everything you're saying, but I'd like to throw in another thought.
Okay.
That I don't know that it has to be an in-depth, deep research, spend days on, but I know it's something that has benefited me personally in not only sharing my stories, but in working with my clients. And that is looking at the emotional quotient as well. We talk about, demographics, we talk about success, we talk about all of these things that you're talking about, and they're crucial. But where is this person at in their business, or in the beginning stages of their entrepreneurship, or whatever they're doing on an emotional level? It is wrong for me to assume, and I'm just going to use my work for example, it is wrong for me to assume that they are confident and want to make a bigger impact. I have to look at their emotional quotient and say, wait a minute, that might not be what is being perceived completely, but it is possible they are devastated in the department of confidence.
That's powerful. I mean, and for me, what you just outlined is what I think is the foundation that storytelling and all of these things stand on, because that's what leadership is. Leadership is seeking to understand, having a highly tuned emotional intelligence. So when you engage someone, you know how to engage that someone. Ideally, you're talking to your ideal prospect. You've done the work, so you know a little bit about who they are already. But then that tuning, that self-awareness, that intuition, and that empathy help you really gauge where they are, to know what voice and what words to engage with, and what story to tell, because there's not, and whether not to tell a story at all. Right? Because I think what I'm not saying that storytelling is for everyone, because when I tell a story that I know is going to go straight into your narrative, it becomes very personal. And doing it in an open forum like Blab, it might be too personal, because I know how it's going to hit you, right? I know you, and I know my personal story is going to touch your personal story, but everybody watching will go, that's very vulnerable. But now it goes, and you might feel uncomfortable being that vulnerable.
Right. Well, we have to know which one of those stories to choose.
Yes.
Another example, and I was not the original person that talked about this. I heard someone talk about, I don't know who the original was, really. But the point of it was you're talking about, you've made a gabillion dollars, and you go and you talk about your gabillion dollars. Well, that might make your audience feel horrible, because what they needed to hear was when you were living in your car.
That's right. That's like when
the wrong story.
Elizabeth Gilbert, a renowned author, very successful, movies have been made out of her books, tells the story of going to the podium, and the theme for this reoccurring presentation she made over and over and over again was, find your passion, find your purpose, and you will succeed. And she did that at a presentation as usual. And a few days later, got a letter from someone who said, "Dear Elizabeth, I was in the audience at your most recent presentation, and I don't know if you saw me. I was near the back. But as you were talking about finding your passion and find your purpose, and that's the path to success, I wanted to cry. I felt crushed, because I'm 40 years old and I haven't found my purpose or my passion. And I just felt terrible." And that's kind of the letter goes on. And Elizabeth is reading the letter, and she's like, whoa, I thought I was helping people, but I was hurting just as many people in the audience. So she rethought this whole notion of this presentation, because she figured that there were people in those audience in the past that didn't write the letter, but they left thinking, I guess I'm a loser. I don't have a purpose or passion.
Yeah.
And that's when the notion of telling the story to the audience without knowing everybody in the audience and how they feel. And it wasn't that she surveyed an audience to say, how did you receive that? Somebody had to write a letter for her to realize that she had been missing the point the whole time. The point was that some people are like jackhammers, she said, that they know from day one what they're going to do. And, at 7 years old, they say, I'm going to be a dentist. At 27, they're a dentist, and they live happily ever after. But there are people that at 7, they want to be a musician. At 15, they want to be a rocket science. And then they go to school, high school and college, and they're not sure what they want to do. And they're an insurance salesperson. But at 35, or 45, it hits them. They say, well, all the aggregation of everything that I've learned, I think I finally got it. But it took 45 years for them to find it.
And that is, it's so true. And another thing that Elizabeth, she speaks about when the first time she was on the Oprah Soul Sunday, or I'm not sure what it was, and she was delivering a speech about confidence. I believe that's what the speech was about. And she stood backstage, terrified, obsessed with her own fear, about to go out on the stage, absolutely terrified of giving this presentation. And dead in her tracks, she stopped and she said, hold up. They have fear. They don't need yours. That's not what they came here for.
Wow.
They came here for confidence. So you better get it together right now.
Wow.
And she did. Yeah. And then you've got the people, like what you were just saying, the people who knew, the people who didn't know. I was determined as a child I was going to be a daddy or a snake. And that didn't work out. That was the goal, daddy or snake. Those were the two choices. But then you've got those people like me who knew exactly what they were supposed to do and ran from it as far and wide and long as they could.
That's my evolution story, is the same. People were always telling me, you should do this. And I'm like, yeah. And I think sometimes we are consciously unconscious of our own power.
Mm-hmm.
We just do it. We don't step into the authority of it. We just do it. And oftentimes it's when you take the time to take a pen in hand and you write your own story. Say, what am I good at and why am I good at it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just what you believe, it's what people have told you. And you
Right.
source all that material from all over, what people have told me throughout the years. And you say, well, you know what? There's a recurring theme here. Everybody says that I have, and I never acknowledged it before, but you know what they say and what I really believe in my heart and what I want to do, I think it's a match.
Mm-hmm.
So you got social proof from outside of you that said they've watched you for a decade or more do this thing that you were doing unconsciously and doing it very well. But when you embrace it and you write it down and you realize that if I consciously do this thing and nurture this thing that I have unconsciously been doing, I could be very powerful. And that's what passion and purpose are built on, because now you can take that and see who in the world you can bring value to with it in a more material and mindful way, whereas opposed to just kind of being at a networking event and somebody presents a problem, you say, well, here's how you fix that. But you are just doing it.
Right.
And there's a term for that now. They call it creative self-disruption. Creative self-disruption is the notion that you disrupt, I'm an insurance salesman, let's say, but I really want to leave the cubicle and start my own business. I have to take and do an assessment on who I am and what I am good at.
Yeah.
And that self-disruption is really understanding your narrative. It's understanding your origin story and understanding how the founding of this business you want to go out and found, what the genesis of it is, the origin, and what that story reads like and who you're in service to and why you're in service to them. We each have that opportunity. And I like to think of these stories that we tell with the narrative that we write, or the oration of that story as we tell our friends and family about our intention, becomes the programming that drives us forward. Just the way my phone or computer I'm looking at has an operating system. The stories we talk and tell out loud about our intention and the stories we write down about our plans become the operating system. It's the old, as a man or a woman thinketh, so it will be. So it is written, so it will be done. All of those kinds of things are old sayings that there's so much truth in them because that's the way we're wired.
And I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage. And I think it takes, not that it's unattainable, I don't mean that at all, but I think it takes tenacity and I think it takes courage, especially in the world we live in today, where it is so easy for someone to pop off, well, you're dumb, and then bail out of the chat or whatever. I think that we have to really be steadfast in our pursuit of this.
I think it's, and Seth Goodwin wrote a book, and it was Purple Cow. And the book is about as big as a stack of Post-it notes. It's not really big, but it's a big idea. And in the book Purple Cow, he's talking about his family driving through France, and they see these black and white cows, and they're hours and hours with kids in the back. You can only imagine what that's like. The kids are like getting bored. And he thinks to himself, he says, what would it be like if around the next bend we saw a purple cow? What would we do? We'd stop. We'd all get out. We'd probably take photos. We'd cross the road and go to the fence and get a closer look. And we might look for a farmhouse to find out, ask the farmer, how did you get a purple cow? And the tagline is, a purple cow would be remarkable in a field of black and white cows. Each of us, until we step into our authority, is just like that black and white cow. When we step into our authority and stand up for the ideas that we have, that's when we stand out like a purple cow. And Seth really does it. He takes complex ideas and makes them simple. And what he goes on to say is that finding that thing that's remarkable about us, each of us, is the key. And then he takes the definition of the word remarkable and says the definition of the word remarkable is something to remark upon, something to remark about. So what is it about you or me or the people in the stream or people watching on replay that they believe is what's remarkable about them? And to your point, Tracy, is the idea that in my evolution story, people were finding things that were remarkable about me. And I was like, I'm not sure I'm worthy of that.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm flattered. I'm really humbled, but that's a big deal. I'm not sure I'm ready. And it became a repetitive thing. And it was only after a while that I kept hearing it and hearing it. And then I wanted to step into my authority. And it took, though, I think the last 3 times that I heard it over the course of a year. And these were big deal people that were saying it to me. And I was like, well, I think I'm finally just going to have to do this.
Yeah.
And in spite of my fear of the slings and arrows that would come at me for standing up to my authority of this thing, that this gift that I wanted to nurture inside of me. When you finally stand up is when you stand out. But it goes squarely to the point you're making. I was afraid. I was afraid of the slings and arrows, and people would say, you're not worthy, and who do you think you are? And, you know, you've been successful at that over there, but this is a whole new thing that you're talking about over here. And why should we honor you for that? And it takes it's self-discovery.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think it was when I finally stopped to write that narrative, to rewrite the programming, is when I was able to stand out, step into that authority and stand up for that idea. And that's essentially the work that I do with brands and business professionals. It's the very same thing. And that's where the authenticity, my evolution story is the same evolution story of everybody that I work with. Every brand that I work with that, like Mont Blanc, might be an old brand that says, you know what? Our marketing material is the same marketing material we're using 10 years ago, and the world's changed. How do we keep pace? And it's not changing and facing forward. It's taking everything from your origin and telling the story of the incredible work that you've done and who you've done it for over all of those years. That makes the brand human. Doesn't have to be new. It just has to be human. And stand in the authority of that humanness.
Well, and it's so important. You know, I call it shining the light. It's so important because other stories have impacted me to tell my stories, you know, and we do all this background information and we get all this information and all of that is valuable, but it's almost as if who am I to decide what you're going to decide? If that makes sense. Who am I to say, nobody cares about that story. That's an irrelevant story. I'm not even going to tell that story.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, it's Brene Brown is the one that put all of it in perspective to me when she tells the story about when she got online and it was just destroyed. And she talks about the man in the arena. And if you're not in the arena, I'm here. I'm in the arena.
Yeah.
And I think that, just that nugget, it can be just a nugget that can powerfully impact someone, catapult them into a place they have been trying to get to for some time.
Yeah, it's I'm a visual person, so this graphical representation of standing up to stand out is, you can be a black umbrella in a field of 7 billion black umbrellas, or you can be the snowflake that the universe intended you to be and represent the fingerprint that is uniquely you. But this fingerprint's mine and only mine. Mm-hmm. And I am me and only me. But when I become more me, when I give myself permission to be me and be who I really am, to be more me is the answer. And that's when I can stand out like that red umbrella, because there's only going to be one me ever.
Right.
There might be somebody that looks like me, but these ideas, these experiences, they're uniquely mine. And with 7 billion people on the planet, my life experience, if I can use that to help other people go on that same journey and get to where they want to go, to become more them as a business professional or a business. And that's the power that we bring to being in service in the work that we do. CD asked the question, what's the most important lesson you've learned about overcoming adversity? I think it's kind of like the mountain story, right? It's like Half Dome in Yosemite is that granite rock that's vertical, and people struggle up the face of that rock with nothing other than a rope to pull themselves higher and higher. And it's a monumental task to go up that face of that rock, and it takes it's stressful. It's no doubt scary, but when you attain the summit, you do the victory. Your arms go up, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, me! I've accomplished this." And there's another CD. There's another great story. Recently, I just heard. I'd never heard it before, and it's the story of the lobster, and the fact that lobster, in the first 7 years of existence, shed their shell 25 times, because that squishy, meaty lobster that so many people like to eat lives in that shell. But at some point, it's like this. It's like, oh my gosh, the shell is so cramped. It's stressful. I've got the anxiety of being cramped in the shell. They go under a rock so predators can't get them, and they shed the cramped and stressful shell, and they grow a new one. That's adversity. But they overcome adversity by finding a safe, quiet place to find a new protective shell, then come back into the world. And they do that over and over again. And we do that when we go to the gym and we pick up a weight and we break the muscle down. Or when we go and on the trail and we run, we stress our lungs, we stress our legs, or we swim, we stress our arms and our entire body. But we're breaking the muscle down in a stressful way. Adversity, we're challenging our body with adversity to make it stronger. And I think I'd answer that question by saying that when we're challenged by the stress, anxiety, and adversity, it's just demonstrating growth, because when you use the weight, your muscle grows. When you intellectually feel beat down by being a founder or being an employee, whatever, if you're eating well and you're sleeping well and you're getting your exercise, you're going to minimize the stress. If you have a mindfulness practice, you're going to minimize your stress. But when doing all those things, you still have stress. You have to think of it as this is growth, and there's a way beyond this. Like that lobster, I feel the stress, but I'm going to step back and look at it almost in an out-of-body experience and say, why am I experiencing this stress? It might be because I'm doing things that I've never done before. And once I overcome this and I accomplish this task, I'll be ready for the next challenging, stressful moment. I'm getting stronger. William, welcome.
Good morning, Tracy and I.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Great blab, guys. You guys are doing very, very well with this content that you're sharing. I wanted to comment on some of the things that you're sharing, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Please do.
One of the biggest things I think to doing that self-evaluation to find out what you're about and what you're good at is sometimes it's scary because it places an additional responsibility to possibly live up to what you've put down on paper. I recently asked my wife, what am I good at? And she said a lot of things that a lot of other people have said who have no dog in the fight. And I'm thinking, based on that, those are the things I should pursue. But it places new guideposts to go to. So that's a type of stress and anxiety. When we all came on here to blab, the learning curve was freaking huge, and I can guarantee you there are a lot of people who just said forget this. But those of us who looked at it the way you just said, Art, as a way of growing or growth, and pushed through it, we're here still today. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
William, that's perfect, because what you just said is what I like to say a lot, and it's all the stuff we've talked about, and I think Tracy touched on it 15 minutes ago, and it was the notion of leadership, and William, you said it so beautifully, is that I'm not sure I'm wanting to go and accept the responsibility to lead with this superpower people say I have. Right, because once you acknowledge that it's there, you've got it. Then you have to accept the mantle of responsibility, like putting epaulets on your shoulder. 4 stars here, 4 stars there. I'm the boss of this idea. They're my ideas, and I am command of it. And I've got to stand up and lead with those ideas, because there are people that need what you have. And if you don't lead, how can they ever get it? And that's so we can be the most brilliant person with the best ideas that sits in a beanbag chair like a mushroom in a dark room, and it serves only us. But if we really are in service to changing something broken in the world, then we have to accept the responsibility to lead. And that, William, just as you said, I think is the hardest thing for people to do, to accept responsibility, to stand up for being the leader. It's easier to just be part of the tribe. Right.
Well, because it opens up choice.
And vulnerability.
Oh, absolutely. Vulnerability. All of this is vulnerability, but I can choose. I can choose. I can shut this thing down and never get on Blab. I can close the podcast. I can never tell you anything about anything ever again. So when we got that lovely question about overcoming adversity, choice and adversity were the 2 words that intuitively popped into my mind. Am I going to fight the good fight or not? Am I going to run the race or not? I get choose. I do. But the interesting thing, and I find this in voice work, primarily when people come to me and they're dealing with fear of public speaking, there's an outcome that they want, and they're going about it in different ways rather than running to the roar. We must run to the roar, because until we do, this thing is this ferocious lion. But when we finally make the choice, have the tenacity, make the choice, run to the roar, we get there, and 99% of the time we discover a little kitten. There is nothing cuter than little kittens. Yeah. Right?
I agree.
It's so true.
And once you get to what was roaring, usually it can be managed step by step. Like, for instance, we talked before, Tracy, and you mentioned the podcasting, and just the process of publishing the post and getting it out to your guests. An email, I don't know if you got it yet, the email I sent you, the first time I did that email with the links and everything, it took me probably an hour and a half to figure it out. And then a couple of times after that, I jumbled it. It's like today is like boom, boom, boom. And now I'm to the point to where I could actually sit down and just show somebody, how to do it. But when I first, basically what I did was I reverse engineered something that John Lee Dumas did when he sends out the links to his guests. I looked at his link and said, how can you get a one-click link to this social platform? And it took me forever. But if I'd have been like, oh, that's scary. That's a tiger. That's a lion. I never would have figured it out. But everything is like pieces. There's another saying, how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah, that's the notion of small wins. You small wins lead to the big things. And welcome, Dennis.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Dennis.
I'm good. And I just wanted to comment on Barbara in the streams that I have found that most people overcome adversity through meaning making. When they find meaning in it, it is possible. That's so beautifully said, Barbara. And Dennis, welcome. Where you calling in from?
Barbados.
Andrew.
Oh, cool.
Andrew Fraser is.
That's my nephew. Yes.
Absolutely. I interviewed Andrew Fraser a couple of weeks ago. A brilliant entrepreneur.
I enjoyed it. That was my first encounter, and I saw this thing when I came back to my desk. I said, "Let me plug in and see what's going on." So.
So what do you think of the subject, Dennis?
I like the subject, and I like some of the things that I hear being said. Just to tie into the last one, it is in order to align things, you need a sense of purpose. If you have purpose, then you can have passion, and those two give you propulsion. And if you find yourself in a situation where you think that destination that's immediately in front of you is all there is, you're in for a surprise, simply because that's just a door opening. It's going to require you to explore more, to grow more, and to take more risk. But the irony is that every time I have been confronted with a worst case scenario, it has occurred. And I'm still here. And for every one of those that I can identify, it gives me a greater foundation of strength. And the other thing that it does, as part of the obligation that goes with it, is once you've been informed about something, you can no longer put it back in the box. And so,
that's right.
I know it. I know.
So as a result, there are a lot of things that will be happening within a small space, but you're seeing the other elements occurring out there that are predictable ripples. And as that, you now become responsible for that and helping to prepare yourself and others to be able to deal with the actual benefits that flow from that ripple. And a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is trying to help people move from the red ocean to the blue ocean. People are trying to compete in as though everything is a scarce market, when in actual fact, when you really have this purpose, passion, you're also, and propulsion, you're also able to create a dynamic where you're one of a kind. And that one of a kind means that you no longer have competitors. And you are opening up a whole new market that others will come behind, and they'll pinch off of it. And that's all well and good. If you learn to welcome that instead of trying to hold on to it, then what happens is all kinds of people will be saying, well, let me try some of that too. And that's how we encourage people. That's how we cast our pebble in the pool.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's that notion, and I'll go back to my sight seller again. My sight seller is that the red ocean is represented by all those black umbrellas competing for the same stuff, right? The blue ocean is when you find that when you stand in the authority of who you are and your purpose, your passion, what you do, what you've identified in the world that you're going to fix with your purple cow, with what makes you remarkable. When you bring that to the world, and you know who you're bringing it to, you know how those people or businesses are going to be changed after they get it. That's where meaning lives, and that's where uniqueness lives. That's what Blue Ocean is about. That's what Airbnb is. I mean, I love their story. I mean, those guys were, and I think the beauty in that story is that the founder of Airbnb was a Rochester School of Design graduate. Yeah. Right. He lives in he moved from Rochester. I mean, he moved from Rhode Island to San Francisco, has roommates. They're all broke. Yeah. You know, they're just broke. And there's a conference in San Francisco they want to attend. They scratch their heads on, we can't attend. We have no money. How are we going to attend this conference? And one of them said, well, we've got this big San Francisco flat, right? There's 10 of us living in this flat, but there's space on the floor. Let's get some air mattresses, and people like us will come and sleep on those air mattresses. They'll pay us. They'll go to the conference. We'll go to the conference.
Amen. Well, it
worked.
I've become a part of Airbnb. And
is that right?
Yeah, I have. I signed up this year, and I have as part of a bigger plan that I had, because I do this executive coaching and helping people who are in transition. But I said, wouldn't it be nice, because I had a few people come and do it, for people to come down and have an executive retreat, an executive coaching in retreat in Barbados. So now you can come down. The guest room is comfortable and all of that kind of stuff. But now you have access to me for whatever number of days you want to sign up for. We can go to the beach. We can play some golf. We can do some fishing. We can do some sailing. We can go to nightclubs, and all of that can be a part of your package.
I'm ready. I'm coming.
What's the website?
So that's, and
that's great.
That just came out of the fact that I've been here for a long time, and I invite people down, and they come. But after a while, I found out it was costing me money to have so many visitors. I didn't want to be inhospitable, but I wanted to be able to make it possible for us all to have a good time with it. And so that's what's come out of it. And as a result, in February and March, I had 10 visitors. And I got people already signed up for May, and somebody I had in April, and somebody wanting to come next year, and somebody coming for Crop Over Festival. And, I have to say, well, how much of it do I actually want? This is the next question that you have to ask as you start these things. I've been doing what I do for over 50 years. And so I don't want to do many of the things that I used to do. But what I progressed toward is to try to build others who can do what I do, but do it even better. They can incorporate all the things that have happened in technology and everything else. And I want to be an enabler. So that's what I call my way of having a team that can carry forth, a legacy team. And in fact, I've structured it so that people who qualify for the legacy team are ultimately going to own the practice. So this is all by way of doing what you've been talking about, which is taking the challenges, but looking at them as opportunities.
Yeah, turning lemons into lemonade sometimes is really what the opportunity is. And that's, as you're talking, Dennis, it's that I whole idea that business, when Circuit City went out of business and Kodak almost went out of business and BlackBerry was gone and back and gone again, the Fortune 500 companies, the Forbes 2000 companies said, whoa, the world's dynamic and changing. Look what happened to those guys. I guess we need to change ourselves before somebody disrupts us too. Well, and from in corporate life, what was born was this notion of creative self-disruption. Mm-hmm. Businesses began disrupting themselves before Uber and Airbnb and Lyft could, right? And that being dynamic now is something each of us can do. And that's how you find the blue ocean. That's how you find the opportunities.
It's not optional, by the way.
It's not optional. Not in the world we live in today, because
it's not optional.
The world is that there's chaos in the markets because of disruption. And every disruptive thing that comes is like a tornado. And if you're an employee, you can't feel secure because that tornado just might run over your employer. And then what do? Right? So we all have to be in this sense of dynamicism and always looking at ourselves as an aggregate of all the experiences that we have. This blab will teach me something that I put into the hopper, and that makes me new again, even more dynamic, because if I don't take the gems that I get from Dennis and Tracy and William to incorporate into me, I'm stagnant.
Well, amen.
Right?
I praise you for doing this.
And what happens is when I look at the world and say, wow, but I've been looking at that all this time and I'm seeing it differently now, but do I have what it takes to fix that? Well, maybe I don't have what it takes, but I've got this idea from Tracy, William, and Dennis that maybe I could do this to a massive team that I could manage that can fix that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's seeing it differently, and it's what artists do all the time. Artists will go on the stage in Broadway theater to do a play for 2.5 hours that their intention is to make us see something we've always seen, to see it differently, right?
Yeah.
And when we see it differently, when we go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and look at a Kandinsky, all that paint splattered on that board, if we stop and look at it long enough, we might get something and see something differently. And what that does, that shift is almost like jumping out of an airplane at 3,000 feet with a parachute.
Mm-hmm.
You see the world like you've never seen it before. And that pivot, that shift can be useful in fueling your innovation and creativity. And if we're not being innovative and creative in the world we live in today, we better get a time machine and go back to 1920 or something like that, because the world that we live in now requires our innovation and creativity to stay on top of our game.
Well, you know, it's at my age, what's the most fascinating is to find out that this is not new.
There's nothing really new.
For all of this digital stuff and all of these other kinds of things, it really comes down to some fundamentals about how you manage yourself and how you manage relationships, the kind of integrity you bring to the process.
That's so true.
Yeah, there's a book called The 5 Minds for the Future by Howard Gardner. And I think that he speaks to it most cogently because he talks about things like discipline and being able to synthesize. And those steps can run into each other. As they synthesize, you can be creative. And as you have integrity, you can do things with more longevity. There isn't anything worth doing that we can accomplish simply by ourselves.
Yeah. And you know what I often will quote Aristotle and Lao Tzu, right? Yeah. Aristotle walked the face of the earth 2,500 years ago, but what he and Socrates and Plato and that cohort of thought leaders then were saying is still relevant today, because to your point, Dennis, those guys were talking about how humans operate in communities of people, and how in those communities we thrive, and what we need to do to thrive in being part of a community. And I think it goes to the work that Tracy does, because, you know, I love what Tracy does, because it's all about how we speak, you know, and it's, in order to speak, we have to think it first before we can speak it. Yep. And I think Tracy's work is evidence of someone being thoughtful to get the right idea, to then use that organ to call people to action with all of the skill and adroitness that someone like Tracy can teach someone how to use. And you know, it goes back to what Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates were doing when they were orators, standing on the steps in Greece, and people would gather around because they would have their discussions and their debates, and the way they delivered the content that they were sharing in their positions was all based on oration. And I guess, Tracy, we could say that, you know, you teach people that speak how to be better orators, because it's all about arguments and selling your idea in a thoughtful, insightful, and compelling way by choosing your words and then using that voice, your most precious organ, to engage and call to action the people that you're speaking with.
I wanted to ask Tracy a question.
Sure.
She mentioned emotional
intelligence
earlier. Yeah. And how you have to recognize, or it's required in order for you to, I guess, influence someone to be step up and stand out. Okay. You have to know if they even have the emotional intelligence to accomplish that task. Now, as a father, I come to this a lot when it comes to my children. You know, we're all fearful, and, you know, we have anxiety and stuff. And I tell them that it's okay to feel that way, but do it anyway. Now, by me, and I've been fearful. Even at my age, there's things I fear about, and if it's important to me, I'll do it anyway. Now, based on saying that, am I pushing them into a situation that they may not be readily, apparently emotionally intelligent enough to handle, or am I pushing them into a pattern of encouraging them to take that step, even though you have these uncomfortable feelings with taking it?
Oh, wow. That's quite a question. You know, my intuition on that is it's pushing them into that option of considering that choice. But I think where I'm coming from on the emotional piece is recognizing and considering what they need. Yeah. Which is far greater and different sometimes than what we need or what we think they need. So it's that intuition of not so much thinking hard lines in the sand. Well, the forks in the road, am I sending them to the right or the left? But what do I want possibility for them to consider to be? What do they need at this time?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's the idea that, it's like that story of the lobster, right? You know your children well. They're your DNA. You know them like you know yourself. And when you see them stressed because they're in, but you know that stress is representative of growth, so they can get to the next level. I certainly would encourage them to. You're not going to encourage them to jump off, the diving board from the 30-foot pedestal into the water if you don't think that they're ready. And so it's the lobster gets a new shell when it's ready for a new shell, and only when it's ready for a new shell. But they have your protection while they're going through that stressful situation and that growth, which is great. The great thing that being a child and having great parents really provides us.
I'd like to take another cut at this emotional intelligence thing, because sometimes I think people try to make it a little more simplistic than it is. And in a way, it is simple, because the first thing about emotional intelligence stems from the fact that you pay more attention to the others than you do to yourself. And that's not with a disregard for your needs. But once again, as I said earlier, nothing that we hope to accomplish can be accomplished by us alone. It virtually presumes we can encourage other people to collaborate with us, to cooperate with us. What happens is we're faced with an approach to communication that defines successful communication is getting our message across. And so you're setting up an adversarial thing, and you're trying to focus on what's important to you and persuade somebody else that is good for them. When you're emotionally intelligent, you understand, but your responsibility is to know what you need and what you need to ask for. But it's cooperation by asking people. You have to answer the question, what's in it for me? That's the world's most famous radio station, WIIFM. If you can't broadcast on that station, you're by yourself. I
think that, Dennis, it's when we call it emotional intelligence, it smacks of, what do you mean? When we take that and simplify it and call it self-awareness, right? It's when I am doing the self-work to make me more self-aware, that means that I've got my intellect, I've been educated through academia, I've got the experiences I've had on Blab and with my family and friends and colleagues that make this what it is. But then there's that heart and gut, that empathy and intuition. That's in aggregate. Those three things are what self-awareness is. I know my strengths, my weaknesses. I know what, when I see something approaching, that it's either fight or flight, the old primal instinct. I'm going to embrace it or I'm going to run from it, right? And that's what empathy and intuition help me do. And I categorize them here. These things I run from, these things I bring towards me. And when I work on that self-awareness, that's when I'm positioning myself to be the best leader that I can become, the leader of me, if that's all I have to lead, or the leader of the business I founded, or the leader of the family that I'm the a partner in leading, like with my significant other. The self-awareness is central, I think, to everything, because until I've done the self-work and have a well-grounded sense of who I am and what my value is, I really can't be in service to anybody else. I mean, I could sell gold pens and still make money, but if I know why I'm bringing these pens into the world and who they're going to serve best. I use an analogy that I use the pencil analogy. You know, when salespeople are always say, challenge you, sell me this pencil. Yeah. Well, if the pencil, I put a number 5 lead in it, let's say that's a harder lead, then my intention is not to sell a pencil to everybody in China. 1.5 billion pencils I could sell, right? Every month, perhaps. I could buy a piece of the internet if I could, sell that many pencils. But my intention is to sell those pencils with that harder lead and that firmer grip to children taking the SAT. And my ideal prospect is the parents and teachers that are guiding those children to aspire to get the highest scores so they get into the best school. And that's all I care about. My mission is to build better leaders because they have scored early in their career higher on the SAT. That's making meaning. And it goes back to what you began the conversation with, Dennis. When you have the intention to make meaning in the world with your purpose, it's hard not to be on point. And speaking about being on point, Tracy and I have been at this for now an hour and 23 minutes, and I had really committed to myself that my blabs would never go beyond 45 minutes, and now I'm doubling that because this is a compelling and an interesting conversation. And with the ad of you, William, who I always enjoy blabbing with, and Dennis, being in the DNA with my good colleague Andrew Frazier, also lets me know that you're one of the good guys as well, and I'm glad that you popped into the seat to share your wisdom. Tracy, any final words? Because I think before we get to 11:30 Pacific time, I'm going to go off and have to do some more business. But I'd love for you to tell people how they can reach you and find you, and what kind of events you've got coming up that they should be aware of.
The best place to find me is at captivatetheroom.com, and you can get straight to my podcast on Captivate the Room, which is captivatetheroom.com from the website. But I'm also on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn under my name, Tracy A. Goodwin. Tracy Goodwin is a romance writer. That is not
I found her.
Yeah. In fact, if you look up my book on Amazon, that is not my book. It is a hot, steamy romance novel. My book is about voice technique.
The first time I found that, I was like, whoa, Tracy, I didn't know that.
A whole other side. So she's got Tracy Goodwin. I'm Tracy A. Goodwin. I've got online courses, and I've got some live events coming up in Austin, Texas, and here in New Jersey. And I am working on launching a longer program, but primarily my primary area that I work with people is one-on-one. But you can find out all about me and what I do and where I'm going and what I'm doing at captivatetheroom.com.
Thank you, Tracy. And I know, William, you're always doing some interesting stuff. Tell us what's up in your world.
I'm still doing my podcast. I'm working on a podcast course, and on Monday, I'm going to go on to my first interview. Tracy's going to interview.
Oh, that's right. William's going to be on my podcast. I'm so excited. I didn't know that was your first interview. Oh, the pressure's on.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I get to tell about, some of my past and what I plan on doing. And it all kind of ties into what you guys been talking about today. I've always been a protector and a helper. And, my name, William, signifies that. And originally I wanted to be a doctor. And I found out all the time doctors were away from their family. And, I grew up without a dad. I said, forget that. So I became a cop. And there's a whole bunch of stories rolled up into that. So I'll unwrap some of that Monday on her.
I can't wait.
That's going to be exciting. And Dennis, tell us, we know you've got like a quasi Airbnb coaching in Barbados thing going on that we want to hear more about. What else do you have going on?
Well, I am involved in helping management consultants become certified to the highest global standards. And with the founding president of the institute here in the Caribbean that is authorized to accomplish that. So I work with that. I have a course that I teach called The Principles of Management Consultancy. We have another one coming up just here in May, where people come in from the region and around the world for 3 days, and we help them be able to make that transition, put them on the path to certification.
So what is the certification called? It's
Certified Management Consultant. If you look up, if you Google me at Dennis Strong CMC, which stands for Certified Management Consultant, there's a ton of information about all the places that I am and what we're doing and what I write about. And it's probably the simplest way to plug into this vortex.
Well, you were at the Power Breakfast, and I missed that when I was in California and only visiting New Jersey. And I know Andrew, who is the founder and host of the Power Breakfast in the Nork Center in New Jersey.
Right.
Said that, that presentation that you did a couple of years ago is still talked about, because this notion of CMC and having a certification as a management consultant is an important one, because it gives you the critical skills to assure you're always doing the right thing.
Well, it certainly does that, but more than that, it really says that you're a person who is committed. Only 1% of all management consultants in the world have this designation. And they, with it comes a responsibility for ethics and all of those other kinds of things. And it plugs you into a network. It has reciprocity around the world. So I particularly, for management consultants of color who have tended not to be able to get in through the front gate for a long time. I call myself the Satchel Paige of management consulting. You learn that it's important to know how to make yourself useful and to be able to collaborate with people at the top of the world. There are a lot of people who are doing small, they're analysts or something like that. They're calling themselves consultants, but they never managed anything, so they're really not a management consultant. And there are a lot of people who buy consultants that have no idea what a management consultant is either. And then they complain about not getting their money's worth. So I'm involved in doing that kind of work globally. And so I do it here in the region, but I also act as an assessor for the other regions around the world.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Well, listen, we're now at 11:30, and I thank everybody, William, Dennis, and my co-host Tracy, for sitting in on this incredible conversation. We've had great dialogue, a lot of thought-provoking stuff, and Tracy, we spent 90 minutes, and it's still, I really want to get to the core of the work that you do and the value that you bring. So I'd love to have you do this again so we can continue to drill down, so we can get to that voice work that you do that I think is so important.
Anytime. I'll come on your show anytime. I'd be delighted.
Fantastic. Well, my name is Art Jones. I'm the principal consultant at The Art of Standing Out, where we use design thinking, brand strategy, and storytelling to help you market better so you can sell more. And on Thursdays and Fridays, and occasionally on Saturdays, I have standout individuals like Tracy Goodwin join me as co-host to bring her special value into the conversation. So Tracy, thank you so much. Thank everybody for watching live and everybody watching on replay. Until next time, peace.
Bye.